problem where we find ourselves today is that we are not having encounters with the Lord. And we are not having encounters with the Lord because we're not having genuine experiences with the Lord. And as we've already stated, this has led to this incredible growth of nihilism where people do not expect God anymore. They really don't. What the American Christian has reduced God to is so non-exceptional in order to not be invalidated that it is effectively pointless to believe in such a God. I mean, I do not want a God who stops me from getting a speeding ticket. I don't want a God who reduces my water bill or who, lowers my insurance rate. I want to tap into the God that gives people purpose. I want to tap into the God that allows a man to be willing to encounter the most heinous and fiercest of consequences, but to stand in sheer bravery and die with honor and with dignity. And the thing that sustained generation after generation after generation of people who would live without esteem and who were more than happy to dwell in obscurity, but they would never deny their Savior. The people that would go to foreign lands and sacrifice everything for a cause that they knew was worthy. These things seem impossible. These things seem impossible to us now because the God that we have in our church houses isn't worthy of this kind of service. We don't have the real God of the Bible in our church anymore. The God that we have in our churches is a very useful, utilitarian God. He serves a purpose, and he serves that purpose well. But that's not the God of the Bible. I want the God of the Bible back into my life and into my church. I want it for my family. Here's one of our greatest struggles. The structure that used to undergird society is gone. The Bible says this: if the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? There is an idea of how innovation comes to pass. And what usually happens is, not unlike a pyramid, there are generations of work, honestly, generations of lifetimes that build up this strong foundational base. And then it will take multiple generations to get to the zenith where there's genuine innovation. If you think about how flight happened, we were flying. We had inflatable balloons for well over 100 years that would stay up in the air longer and honestly could go higher and further than the Wright brothers airplane did. But all of those generations of flight and of exposure to this new idea led to the point where there could be a genuine breakthrough. And this is how anything arrives. Nobody goes to sleep one night and dreams up every single aspect of how to play the game of baseball. You've got generations upon generations upon generations building around basic ideas of bat and ball and maybe some borrowed concepts from cricket or things like that. And then after years and years of refinement and rules and ideas, and you get this very complex thing that we have today. Well, society's no different. We had an extremely complex substructure of ethic that helped build this country. Now, are you saying America was a Christian nation? America was constructed by Christians. The people that were in this country were Christian. They weren't anything else, right? So they were godly people who were governed and had deep morality and lived accordingly. And the times when we had great influxes of people who didn't have this ethic, it seemed like the society was able to accept these things and move them towards points where they could realize the greater good. Well, we don't have that capacity anymore because the individuals are no longer have that capacity, and they don't have that capacity because long ago we've been broken off from the morality that undergirded what we call Christianity. And that morality was based on a relationship with God. Well, all right, now we don't have the spiritual experiences, okay? When you think about what an experience is nothing more than memory. Your experience is nothing more than your collective memories. If you think about how the wisdom of genetic memory is passed down from generation to generation. We have these things. I'm going to use an example. It's called multi-generational migration of monarch butterflies, where you have a generation that leaves Mexico, and along the way they die, but they lay eggs, and then that generation continues to migrate north, and then that generation continues to migrate north, and then that generation breeds and frolics and continues to migrate north, and then finally when it's time to go back south, you have this great leap forward where all of a sudden the generation that's born can go from living to 6 weeks up to 8 months. And it can, instead of just going a rather small distance and perishing before it goes any further, it's able to commute all the way back to Mexico. Now, I want you to understand that by the time you have a generation that leaves northern Canada to go back to Mexico, that generation is not one generation removed from Mexico, it's probably 4. But yet, because of the genetic memory that's been passed down, you have this incredible flourishing that occurs within the generation. Sadly, what I see is generations that have set up their children for abject failure. And they, although they tried to trailblaze to establish a relationship with God, did not get very far because they were handicapped by their own inability to live up to the ethics that they so profoundly promoted to their generation. We are a far ways away from being able to have a generation that could flourish. We are probably on the cusp of having to have multiple generations sacrifice and lay down their lives in true effort in order to produce a generation, maybe 4 or 5 generations from now, who could flourish with the Lord. But there is no way that I would ever be content not having access to the Lord. There's no way that I could ever be satisfied with going through some sort of mundane, routine theater piece. I feel like what happened is the thing that was supposed to occur was there's supposed to be these memoriams in our life. There's supposed to be these moments of great importance that we can look back to and build a structure upon and have great strength going forward from those foundational pieces. And instead what happened is, because we didn't have that memoriam, we didn't have a genuine understanding of the sacrifices that laid before us, and we didn't have a real connection back to the past, we now are trying to relive the past almost as a piece of theater. We're trying to re-exercise the faith that people had 100 years ago instead of having faith the way that we should today in sight of the problems that we face, which are highly different than the generation that preceded us. Something's taken place where we are so much better at pretending to be Christians than being Christian. I've read this statistic before, but there was one preacher who famously said he thought 90% of all professing Christians were lost. That should not be an indictment on the professing Christians. That should be an indictment on all of Christianity, that we are better at producing fraudulent confessions than we are true conversions. What does that say about what we're doing? We are reaping what we've sown. The problem is that there was a generation who was sowing things in hopes of reaping a product that was not what they were really planting. Instead of being gracious and empathetic, we taught people to be kind and courteous. And false grace produces a fruit far worse than harsh honesty. Instead of being genuinely compassionate and loving, we taught people social cliches like God bless you, or bless your heart, or I'm praying for you. I wonder how many times somebody has said I'm praying for you and never prayed for the person. I don't even know if our practice of prayer requests that goes on in most church services isn't just an exercise in wasted futility, because there's no actual prayers that are said. It was a harsh reality for me when I realized, because I was naive in my Christianity. I was so naive in my Christianity that I had to realize that I was praying more for people's kids than they were. I was putting more effort and care into other individuals than the individuals who are actually asking for prayer. I don't know what's happened to us that we've wanted to make Christianity a religious exercise or a social exercise or a cultural badge of honor that has no real weight. It feels like when someone says, God bless the troops, in one breath, and then the next breath they cut funding for wounded veterans. It feels like we have cut all ties to genuine Christianity. Well, meanwhile, we have done nothing better but espouse the ideas that we have around Christianity. And this has done nothing but led to a generation that says church is full of nothing but hypocrites, and the people that go to church are fake or they are disingenuous. And what you have to say is there has to be an honest rebuttal at some point to say that, yes, that's true. And you wonder why that's true. It's because I've been disingenuous. I've been fake. I've been all of those things, right? I've espoused one ethic and not lived up to it, right? And so if I know that I have been those things, and I know others have been those things, then I can't sit there and dismiss these very real arguments or very real concerns that are being put forth by a younger generation. And I feel like the only thing that people know what to do is to then point flaws out of the opposing side. And like I said, it just brings more division. And it feels like the place that's supposed to be eternal and supernatural has all of the finite qualities of an earthly political contest, where we're trying to gain points and win sides and exercise debate and dominion over one another. Stop trying to explain and start showing people heaven. Start showing people God. Do you want to know what the truth of the matter is? If you will show people the God of heaven, if you will show people the fruits of the Spirit, the failures that we all have and can all admit to seem to fall away. I've seen people who are incredibly flawed humans, incredibly flawed, but yet these people who are incredibly flawed are universally loved because their actions are better than their words. How many of you have a grandfather or maybe even a dad who cusses and says some things that are inappropriate and, isn't always the best in mixed company, but yet you've seen them show people more love, sacrifice, do more for the people that they love than anyone else you've ever seen. Be faithful. Be in your corner. Know that you can trust them. Be reliable. So who cares about the flaws? Who cares about the flaws when you see all of that love? There's an old man. He was crying and he was talking about his father. And he said, he remembered his father waking up one of these cold winter mornings. And, they only had wood heat as a stove back then. He would get up and he would get up when it was cold and when it was bitter. And he would go and get the logs and he would start a fire and he'd warm it up and he would polish his son's shoes. And he did all of these gracious, caring acts of love, acts of service, and never expected anyone to tell him thank you. And this older man was crying because he said, I never got to tell him how much it meant to me that he would do that he would be the one who faced the cold every winter morning, that he would go to work without the polished shoes so that I could have polished shoes for school. I want to remember the sacrifice of the previous generation, and I want to honor those who went before us and did great things. But I don't want to mimic them. I don't want to be some sad imitation of previous heroes, because that makes it impossible for this generation to birth their own heroes. We don't have the experiences. So we don't have the generational memory to build upon. As a result of the loss of generational memory, we have spiritual amnesia. You genuinely have something now that's so startling. Whatever this generation thinks of God, they're basing it off what they have seen of God in the previous generation. And it's not enough. I'm trying to get you to tap back into your intuition, because there is a source of something better to resort to. And we might have to go a couple of generations back to get to the point where they had something real. But I'd rather go on that journey than keep living with something fake. There's nothing better than having an intimate relationship with God. And there might not be anything worse than having to pretend that you do have one.